All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going deep into the world of the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes in India. Essential stuff for those prepping for UPSC exams, but honestly super interesting even if you're just curious about social justice, how India works.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that everyone should really have a grasp on, at least the basics.
Exactly. And to help us out, we've got excerpts from a key document all about the NCST. And here's something to think about right off the bat. Did you know there was a time when we had one commission for both scheduled castes and E-tribes?
Interesting, right?
Yeah, a single body handling all that. But of course, as we'll see, the unique needs of scheduled tribes. Well, they demanded a dedicated commission. We'll get into all that.
We'll uncover why that split happened and what it means for tribal welfare today.
Absolutely. So let's kick things off with the fundamentals. What is the NCST? Where does it sit within the Indian Constitution? Big picture stuff.
Okay, so the NCST, that's a constitutional body directly established by Article 338A. This came about after the 89th Amendment, formed in 2004. But, and this is important, it's not like the concept was totally brand new.
Oh, so there's a history here, a backstory.
Absolutely. So, rewind a bit. The NCST was originally a part of a combined commission.
Combined, meaning?
Meaning it handled both scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, all in one. This was back in 1990.
I see. So why the change? Why was there a need to separate, to have a commission specifically for scheduled tribes? What happened?
It really boils down to recognizing the distinct challenges, the specific needs of these communities. Geographically, culturally, developmentally even, they often require a more, tailored approach. And a combined commission just couldn't provide that level of focus. It's like, imagine trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
That makes sense. A dedicated body can really hone in on those unique issues.
Exactly. And this whole idea gained even more momentum in '99 with the Ministry of Tribal Affairs being created, a separate ministry focused solely on tribal welfare.
Right. A dedicated ministry and a dedicated commission working hand in hand.
Powerful combination for sure.
Okay, so we've got the who figured out the dedicated body. Now for the what?
Yeah.
What does the NCST actually do? What are its main responsibilities? Break it down for us.
All right, so the document we're looking at, it lays out 6 core functions of the NCST. And these functions, they really highlight the proactive role it's supposed to play.
Proactive.
Yeah, not just reacting to problems, but actively going out there, ensuring things are running smoothly, like, first and foremost, investigating and monitoring all the safeguards provided for scheduled tribes.
Okay, safeguards meaning?
Meaning all those constitutional safeguards, legal provisions, government schemes, you name it. The NCST's job is to make sure these are actually implemented effectively.
So they're like watchdogs, making sure no one's cutting corners.
Precisely. And this naturally leads to their second core function, addressing complaints. If an individual, a community, believes their rights as scheduled tribes have been violated, they can go to the NCST.
And the NCST will?
Investigate those complaints, absolutely. They can then recommend action to be taken. It's like a court specifically for tribal rights, you could say.
Powerful stuff. So they're not just passively observing, they're actively involved in righting wrongs.
Right. And beyond investigations, they also play a big role in development planning, participating in advising on socio-economic plans for scheduled tribes at both the union and state levels.
So they're ensuring those plans are actually beneficial for the communities they're supposed to help.
Exactly. They're bringing that tribal perspective into the development conversation.
So we've got investigation, monitoring, complaint resolution, involvement in planning. What else is on the NCST's to-do list?
Well, any good watchdog needs to report their findings, right? That's where the annual reports come in.
Right, those yearly reports they submit to the president.
Exactly. They outline their observations, recommendations, any significant issues they've come across. It's a way to track how scheduled tribes are faring, whether those safeguards are working.
So it's about transparency, keeping everyone informed about the situation on the ground.
Exactly. And for those UPSC folks, this reporting structure is crucial to know. Those relationships between government bodies.
Oh yeah, the UPSC loves those details.
But honestly, even beyond exams, it's just good civic knowledge, understanding how things work.
Absolutely. Okay, so they investigate, they monitor, they advise, and they report. Anything else?
No, there's more. Remember, they don't just point out problems, they offer solutions. That means making recommendations to the government. Recommendations on how to implement safeguards effectively, protect, and promote welfare and development of the STs.
So drawing on their experiences, their understanding of the situation, they're suggesting improvements.
Exactly. They're using their knowledge to make things better, not just highlighting what's wrong.
Proactive, just like we said.
Exactly. And finally, this is kind of a catch-all category, but they're also empowered to carry out any other function that the president might specify.
So basically, they can adapt to new challenges, new issues as they arise.
Precisely. Flexibility is key, right?
Makes sense. That's a pretty impressive range of responsibilities.
It is, but hold on because there's more. Remember those additional functions we mentioned assigned to the NCST in 2005?
Oh, right. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty details.
Think of it this way. Those 6 core functions, they're like the foundation, the broad strokes. These additional functions, they get a bit more specific, targeting some of the daily challenges tribal communities face.
Interesting. So what are some of these extra responsibilities? What does that look like in practice?
Well, for example, one of them focuses on ensuring scheduled tribes who live in forest areas, they have ownership rights over minor forest produce.
Wow, that's huge. I mean, for so many communities, their livelihoods are tied to the forest. Having secure rights to those resources, that's essential.
Exactly, and it gets even more granular. Another function focuses on safeguarding their rights over resources like minerals and water.
So economic empowerment, environmental protection, access to basic resources. The NCST's mandate is pretty broad.
It is, and it's so important to remember these aren't just abstract policy issues. These are things that directly impact people's lives, millions of people.
Absolutely. And for our UPSC folks, these additional functions, they're like gold mines for essay topics, interview questions, showing you really understand the depth of this topic.
For sure. But even for those not taking exams, being aware of these issues, it makes you a more informed citizen. It's about understanding the realities of life for these communities.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, so we've touched on 2 of those additional functions, ownership rights to forest produce and safeguarding those mineral and water rights. What else is on this list?
Well, we talked about rights, resources, but there's also this whole focus on livelihood strategies,
Yeah.
making sure tribal communities have viable options, ways to support themselves.
Right, so it's not just about protecting what's already there, but helping them grow economically.
Yeah, exactly. Promoting entrepreneurship, skill development, supporting traditional crafts and occupations, it's all part of the picture.
So a holistic approach, looking at the whole economic landscape for these communities.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the issue of displacement. It's a reality for many tribal communities, sadly, often due to development projects.
Yeah, development's essential, but not at the cost of pushing these communities aside.
Right. So the NCST, they have a responsibility to look at those relief and rehabilitation measures for displaced groups, making sure they're effective, actually helping people get back on their feet.
Such a crucial aspect. Because it's not just about moving people, it's about ensuring they have a future, a place to rebuild their lives.
Exactly. And it's all connected, like there's this focus on preventing land alienation, too.
Land's such a fundamental issue, especially for tribal communities. Their connection to the land, it's so deep, culturally, spiritually.
Absolutely. And for those who have already been alienated from their land, the NCST also looks at how to make rehabilitation efforts work better.
So it's about addressing past injustices, as well as preventing future ones. It's multifaceted, this whole thing.
It is. And speaking of land, the next couple of functions, they highlight how crucial tribal communities are for the environment, for sustainability.
Oh, tell me more.
So one function focuses on involving tribal communities and protecting forests, participating in afforestation efforts.
That makes sense. Who better to protect the forests than the people who've lived in them, depended on them for generations?
Exactly. It's about recognizing their knowledge, their connection to the land. And then there's another function that deals with shifting cultivation, aiming to reduce, eventually eliminate the practice.
Now, shifting cultivation, that's a complex one, right? Environmentally, socioeconomically. It's a tricky balance.
It is complex, and that's where the NCST comes in. They can navigate those complexities, try to find solutions that work for everyone, the environment included.
Right, because there are no easy answers when it comes to something like that. It's about finding sustainable alternatives, considering the needs of the communities involved.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance.
It's really fascinating, all this. The level of thought, consideration that goes into this framework for protecting tribal communities.
It is, and we've got one more of those additional functions to cover. This one's about governance, making sure the provisions of Panchayat's Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, that's PISA, is implemented effectively.
PISA. UPSC aspirants, take note. This is one to know.
Crucial piece of legislation. It's all about giving tribal communities the power to govern their own affairs through the Panchayati Raj system.
Right. Self-governance, respecting those traditional systems.
Yeah. And the NCST's role is to make sure that's happening, that the act is making a real difference on the ground, ensuring those communities have a voice.
Because it's one thing to have a law on paper, but another to see it translated into actual change, empowerment.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we've covered all 8 of those additional functions. Quite a list, isn't it?
It is. From those 6 core functions, which are already pretty substantial, to these 8 specific areas, it's clear the NCST has a lot on its plate.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But before we get too overwhelmed by the sheer amount of responsibility here, let's switch gears a bit. We've talked about the who and the what, the composition and the functions.
Right. The building blocks, essentially.
Exactly. Now, how about the how? How do they actually make all this happen? What kind of power do they have to enforce all of this?
That's the million-dollar question. We've seen how much they're responsible for, but what tools do they have to get it done? How do they make sure things actually change?
Well, that's where those investigative powers come in. And trust me, the NCST is not just some advisory body with no real authority.
Oh, yeah. So they've got some teeth, you're saying?
They do. Some serious teeth, actually. For starters, the commission, it functions a lot like a civil court.
Wait, really? A court?
Yeah. They have the power to summon individuals, demand documents, record evidence under oath, all that stuff you'd expect in a formal legal setting.
So it's like they're conducting their own trials, focused specifically on issues impacting scheduled tribes.
That's a good way to put it. They're building cases, gathering evidence, making sure those who violate the rights of these communities are held accountable.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So they're not just relying on people's good intentions. They can compel them to participate, hand over evidence.
Exactly. They've got clout, and they use it.
Now, that's reassuring to know that there's a body out there with real power dedicated to this cause.
It is. But what happens after those investigations? Where do the findings go? How do they ensure action is taken?
Right, because what good is an investigation if nothing changes afterward?
Well, remember those annual reports we talked about, the ones submitted to the president?
Yep, key detail for the UPSC folks.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. The president doesn't just read those and file them away. They have to present them before Parliament, along with a memorandum.
A memorandum. What's that for?
This memorandum, it explains what actions have been taken based on the Commission's recommendations. And if any recommendations were rejected, it has to say why. No sweeping things under the rug.
So it's about transparency, accountability. The government can't just ignore the NCST's findings. They have to explain themselves.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Any part of the report that's relevant to a specific state government, it gets forwarded to the governor of that state.
So we've got the president informing Parliament at the national level, the governor informing the state legislature at the regional level. These reports are getting a lot of visibility.
They are, ensuring these issues get the attention they deserve at the highest levels of government, and that the government is held responsible for its response.
That's a pretty impressive system. Shows how seriously they take the NCST's work.
It does. But there's one more aspect of the NCST's influence we need to touch on: consultation.
Right. It's not just about reacting to problems, it's about being involved from the get-go, right?
Exactly. Both the central and state governments, they're obligated to consult with the NCST on any major policy decisions that might affect scheduled tribes.
So they have a seat at the table, a chance to weigh in before those policies are set in stone.
Absolutely. It ensures tribal perspectives are considered, potential impacts are assessed before anything's implemented.
So it's a proactive approach, preventing problems rather than just dealing with the fallout later.
That's the idea, trying to get ahead of the curve rather than just playing catch-up.
I love that. It elevates the NCST's role even further. They're not just cleaning up messes, they're helping to prevent those messes in the first place.
Exactly. Working to ensure those rights, that well-being is considered at every level.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. Origins, composition, functions, those additional responsibilities, investigative powers, reporting mechanisms, their role in policymaking. It's been quite a journey.
It has a true deep dive. We've gone from basic understanding to really appreciating the complexity, the nuance of the NCST and its role in the Indian system.
I feel like I could write a whole essay on this now, all thanks to this deep dive.
I have no doubt you could. But before we wrap things up, one final question for you and for our listeners.
Lay it on us. What's that final thought?
Well, we've seen how much power the NCST has, at least on paper. And the scope of their responsibilities, wow, it's impressive, right?
Yeah, they've got their work cut out for them, that's for sure.
But it makes me wonder, what are the biggest hurdles they face? I mean, actually achieving their objectives, translating all this into tangible change for scheduled tribes across such a vast, diverse country, that can't be easy.
No, definitely not. You've got hundreds of distinct scheduled tribes in India, each with their own unique customs, languages, challenges. A one-size-fits-all approach, it just won't work.
Exactly. The NCST needs to be sensitive to all those nuances, find ways to adapt their approach to each specific context. It requires a deep understanding of those local realities, which can be tough when you're operating at a national level.
Right, like trying to manage 1,000 different puzzle pieces, each one essential to the big picture.
Perfect analogy. And then there's the question of resources. Does the NCST have enough funding, enough staff, the infrastructure to do all this effectively?
That's a good question for our listeners to think about.
Yeah.
And for those UPSC aspirants, those tricky interview questions, thinking critically about these challenges, that's how you stand out.
For sure. Go deeper, check out their annual reports, see what their budget looks like, get a sense of what they're working with.
And don't forget those broader social and political factors. Poverty, illiteracy, discrimination. How do those things impact the NCST's ability to reach those they're supposed to serve?
It's the real world stuff, It's one thing to understand the framework, but seeing how it plays out with all those complexities, that's where things get interesting.
That's what this deep dive is all about, peeling back the layers, getting a sense of the challenges and opportunities, the whole picture.
Exactly. We've given you the foundation, the tools, now go explore, dig deeper.
So to all our listeners, keep that curiosity going. Research some cases the NCSC has handled, read their reports, and connect all this to the world around you.
Because knowledge is power, right? Understanding how these mechanisms work, that's the first step toward positive change.
Beautifully said. All right, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.